For 5 years, he endured cold, rain, and loneliness. His world was a silent, gray existence, just him, the endless road, and the weight of memories that refused to fade. The tattered coat on his back barely shielded him from the biting wind, and the cardboard he slept on offered no comfort against the freezing pavement. People passed him by, never meeting his eyes. He had once tried to speak, to ask for help, but the world had grown deaf to his voice. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but he had grown used to the emptiness. Then one day a miracle happened. It was just another cold morning when he felt a gentle tap on his shoulder. He turned, expecting the usual look of pity or dismissal. Instead, he saw a pair of warm, kind eyes staring back at him. A woman stood there, holding out a steaming cup of coffee and a bag of food. "I've seen you here for a long time," she said softly. "What's your name?" For the first time in years, he hesitated. His name. How long had it been since someone asked? His throat tightened, but he managed to whisper, "Michael." The woman smiled. "Nice to meet you, Michael. My name is Sarah. Let's get you somewhere warm." He wanted to refuse, to tell her he was beyond saving. But something in her voice and her eyes made him believe, just for a moment, that maybe he wasn't invisible. Maybe he wasn't lost forever. And so, for the first time in 5 years, Michael stood up, not just from the pavement, but from the darkness that had held him prisoner for so long. He didn't know what the future held, but as he followed Sarah into the light of a new day, he dared to hope again. Michael followed Sarah down the bustling city street, his legs weak from years of weariness, but his heart beating with something unfamiliar: hope. She led him to a small cafe, warm and filled with the scent of fresh bread and coffee. The moment he stepped inside, the heat wrapped around him like a forgotten embrace. "Sit here," Sarah said, pulling out a chair near the window. Michael hesitated but obeyed. She ordered him a warm meal, and when the plate was set before him, he stared at it for a long time. A real meal. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to eat something other than scraps. As he took his first hesitant bite, Sarah watched him with quiet patience. "Michael," she said gently, "how did you end up here?" He swallowed hard. It was a question he had never answered aloud. The memories rushed back, losing his job, his home, the people who once cared about him slowly fading away. The loneliness had been unbearable, the days blending into each other until time lost meaning. I lost everything," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, as if she understood. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Michael wanted to believe her, but after 5 years of solitude, trusting another person felt impossible. Still, as he finished his meal and Sarah continued to talk about shelters, programs, and a chance to rebuild, he felt something shift inside him. A tiny crack in the walls he had built around himself. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to wonder, could this really be a new beginning? Michael sat in the warmth of the cafe, his hands wrapped around the coffee cup, absorbing its heat. He listened as Sarah spoke, her voice steady yet filled with something he hadn't encountered in years: genuine kindness. She told him about a nearby shelter, one that helped people get back on their feet. It wasn't just a bed for the night. They helped with finding work, counseling, even reconnecting with lost family if someone wanted to. But Michael hesitated. The past 5 years had taught him not to trust promises. Too many times, people had given him scraps of hope, only to walk away when it became inconvenient. Would this be the same? Sensing his doubt, Sarah smiled. "You don't have to decide now. But there's a place for you if you want it." She pulled a small card from her purse and slid it across the table. "That's the address. If you come by tonight, I'll be there." Michael stared at the card, tracing the edges with his fingers. A part of him wanted to shove it away, to disappear back into the cold, familiar streets where no one expected anything from him. But another part, the part that had been longing for warmth, for connection, clung to it. "I'll think about it," he muttered. Sarah nodded, not pushing him further. Instead, she took out her phone. "Do you have anyone you'd like to contact? Family? Friends?" Michael's chest tightened. Family. It had been years since he had spoken to his sister, Emma. The last time they talked, she had begged him to let her help. But he had been too ashamed, too proud. He had pushed her away, convinced he could fix his life on his own. But then one bad break turned into another, and soon, he was lost in a world where fixing anything seemed impossible. "She probably doesn't want to hear from me," he said after a long silence. "You'd be surprised," Sarah replied gently. "Sometimes the people we think have given up on us are just waiting for us to reach out." Michael wasn't sure if he believed that, but the thought of Emma, of her knowing he was still alive, stirred something inside him. They sat in silence for a moment before Sarah glanced at the time. "I have to get going," she said, standing up. "But if you decide to come to the shelter, I'll be there until 8. And if you ever want to talk, you can call me." She pulled another slip of paper from her bag, this one with a phone number. "No pressure, okay?" Michael took it, feeling an odd lump in his throat. He had nothing to give in return. No money, no home, not even a real reason for her kindness. And yet, she had given him warmth, food, and something even more precious, her time. As she walked away, Michael remained seated, staring at the address and phone number. He could crumple them up, pretend this never happened, go back to the life he had come to accept. Or he could take a step toward something different, something unknown. Hours passed as he sat there, lost in thought. The cafe staff, though aware of him, didn't rush him out. The warmth of the room, the smell of fresh pastries, the quiet hum of conversations, it felt like a world he had long forgotten. A world he had once belonged to. As the sky outside darkened, he finally stood. His hands trembled slightly as he tucked the card and the phone number into his pocket. The decision wasn't easy, but for the first time in 5 years, he took a step toward change. Toward the shelter. Toward Sarah. Toward hope. Michael stepped out of the cafe, the night air crisp against his skin. The city lights flickered above him, casting long shadows on the pavement. The small card with the shelter's address felt heavy in his pocket, as if it carried more than just an invitation. It carried the weight of a choice he wasn't sure he was ready to make. His feet moved on their own, carrying him down familiar streets, past the alleyways and doorways where he had once curled up for the night. The city had been his home in the worst way possible, offering only cold concrete and the occasional kindness of a stranger. Would he really be able to leave this behind? Could he trust that the shelter was more than just another temporary escape? He found himself standing at a crosswalk, staring at the glowing red hand that signaled him to wait. Across the street, a group of people laughed as they exited a restaurant, their coats thick and warm, their faces filled with comfort he hadn't known in years. He turned away. Michael walked until he reached the park where he sometimes slept. He sank onto a bench, rubbing his hands together for warmth. His mind was at war with itself. Going to the shelter meant facing his past, facing people who might ask questions he didn't want to answer. But staying out here, he knew what that meant too. Another night of cold. Another night of loneliness. Another night wondering if he'd ever get out. A voice cut through his thoughts. Michael? His breath caught. No one called his name anymore. He turned sharply, his heart pounding, and saw a woman standing a few feet away. She was staring at him with wide eyes, her hands clutched to her chest as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. It took him a moment to recognize her. And when he did, his knees nearly gave out. Emma? His sister took a step closer, her face a mixture of shock, relief, and something he couldn't quite name. "Oh my God, it is you," she whispered. Michael felt frozen, as if the years apart had turned to stone around him, making it impossible to move, to speak. He had imagined this moment before, but in those dreams, he was whole again, clean-shaven, wearing new clothes, standing tall, ready to apologize. Not like this. Not broken. Not lost. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I thought you were gone." Michael swallowed hard. "I almost was." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Emma rushed forward and threw her arms around him. He stiffened and used to the warmth of an embrace, but slowly, something in him gave way. He let her hold him. "I looked for you," she whispered against his shoulder. "I never stopped looking." Michael squeezed his eyes shut. After all this time, after all the shame, she hadn't given up on him. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to find his way back. Michael stood frozen in his sister's embrace, unsure how to respond. His body, stiff from years of solitude, felt unfamiliar in the warmth of her arms. A part of him wanted to pull away, to disappear back into the night before she could see just how far he had fallen. But another part, the part that had been longing for connection, held on. Emma finally pulled back, her hands gripping his arms as if afraid he might vanish. She studied him, her eyes filled with sadness but also relief. "Where have you been?" she asked softly. Michael hesitated. How could he explain 5 years of loneliness, of hunger, of hopelessness in just a few words? He looked down at the worn pavement beneath them. "Nowhere," he muttered. "Everywhere." Emma exhaled shakily. "I tried to find you. I searched shelters, hospitals, even the police. But after a while, she swallowed hard. I was scared I'd never see you again." Guilt tightened in his chest. He had done this to her. He had vanished without a trace, pushing her away when she had only wanted to help. And now here she was still reaching out. He struggled to find the words, but nothing seemed enough. He wasn't ready to explain, not yet. Emma seemed to understand. She wiped her eyes quickly and straightened. "Come with me," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "Please." Michael took a shaky breath. I don't know. "Just for tonight," she urged. "You don't have to decide anything. Just come home, get warm, get some rest." Home. The word felt foreign to him now. Did he even deserve that? "I was going to a shelter," he admitted, surprising himself. "A woman, Sarah, she told me about a place." He pulled the card from his pocket and showed it to her. Emma's eyes flickered with recognition. "That's a good place. I've volunteered there before." Michael frowned. "You have?" She nodded. "I started helping out after I lost you. I thought maybe I could find you there one day." Her voice trembled. "I guess I finally did." Michael felt his throat tighten. For years, he had believed he was completely alone, forgotten. But she had never stopped looking. She had been waiting for him to come back. Emma reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his cold skin. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," she whispered. "Let me help you." Michael looked at her, then at the card in his other hand. 2 choices lay before him. Go with Emma, back to a life he had abandoned, or take the first step into something new, something unknown. He didn't know if he was ready. He didn't know if he would ever be ready. But for the first time in 5 years, he wanted to try. Slowly, he nodded. "Okay." Emma smiled through her tears and squeezed his hand. "Let's go home." And as they walked together into the night, Michael felt something stir deep inside him. A flicker of hope. A chance at something more. A beginning. Michael walked beside Emma, his steps hesitant, as if at any moment the ground beneath him might give way. The city around them was the same one he had wandered through for years, yet tonight, it felt different, less like a prison and more like a path leading somewhere unknown. Somewhere he wasn't sure he deserved. Emma's car was parked a few blocks away, a modest sedan that looked exactly as he remembered from years ago. She unlocked the door and motioned for him to get in. He hesitated. It had been so long since he had been inside a car, since he had been anywhere that felt normal. "I can take you to the shelter if you'd rather go there," Emma said softly, reading his hesitation. "But I'd love for you to come home, even if it's just for a night." Home. Could he even call it that anymore? Michael looked down at his worn-out shoes, the dirt on his hands, the ragged coat clinging to his thin frame. He didn't belong in a warm house, in a clean bed. He belonged out here, in the cold, where no one could be disappointed in him. Emma must have sensed his thoughts because she stepped closer. "It's just a place, Michael. Walls, a roof, a warm bed. But what really matters is that you're safe." She smiled gently. "And that you don't have to be alone." Something in her voice broke through the wall he had built around himself. Without another word, he opened the car door and slid into the passenger seat. As they drove through the city, Michael stared out the window. The streets he had once called home blurred past him, their cold familiarity fading with each mile. He thought about Sarah, about the shelter, about the people he had met in the streets, the ones who would still be out there tonight, just as he had been every night for the past 5 years. A part of him felt guilty for leaving them behind. Another part feared that this was a mistake, that he would never fit into the world he had once known. Emma didn't push him to talk. Instead, she turned on the radio, letting soft music fill the silence. It wasn't until they pulled into the driveway of a small, familiar house that the weight of everything truly settled on him. He swallowed hard. "You still live here?" Emma nodded. "I thought about moving, but I couldn't. Too many memories." Michael let out a shaky breath. He had grown up in this house. He could still picture their mother in the kitchen, the sound of laughter echoing through the halls. That life felt like a different world now, one that belonged to someone else. Emma shut off the engine and turned to him. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to, but I hope you will." Michael stared at the house, his hands trembling in his lap. He could walk away. He could go back to what he knew, where there were no expectations, no risks. Or he could take a step forward. Slowly, he reached for the door handle and stepped out. Emma smiled, tears glistening in her eyes as she led him inside. As he crossed the threshold, warmth wrapped around him, not just from the heater humming softly in the background, but from the simple, quiet presence of home. It was unfamiliar. It was terrifying. But for the first time in 5 years, Michael allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had found his way back. Michael stepped inside, the soft glow of the living room light casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Everything looked the same yet different, like a memory blurred at the edges. The familiar scent of cinnamon and vanilla lingered in the air. Emma must still have the same scented candles their mother used to love. "Sit down," Emma said gently, motioning toward the couch. "I'll get you some clean clothes and a towel if you want to shower." Michael hesitated before lowering himself onto the couch. The fabric felt too soft, too unfamiliar against his worn clothes. He had spent years sleeping on concrete, on park benches, in doorways. Now, even something as simple as a couch felt foreign. Emma disappeared down the hall, leaving him alone with his thoughts. His eyes wandered across the room. Framed photographs lined the walls, pictures of their parents, of Emma, of people he didn't recognize. In one, Emma stood beside a man and a young girl, both smiling. Michael's stomach twisted. Had he missed that much? Had she built a whole life while he had been lost in the streets? Emma returned a few minutes later, setting a folded set of clothes beside him. "They might be a little big," she said, "but they'll be clean." Michael nodded, but didn't move. She sat across from him, studying his face. "I know this is a lot," she said carefully. "You don't have to talk about anything tonight if you don't want to." He swallowed hard. "Who's the girl in the picture?" His voice was rough and used to conversation. Emma's face softened. "That's Lily. My daughter." Michael's breath caught. "You have a kid?" She smiled. "Yeah. She's 4 now." For years. He had been gone even longer than that. She had become a mother, and he hadn't even known. "She's with her dad tonight," Emma continued. "I thought it might be easier for you if it was just us." Michael looked down at his hands. "You didn't have to do this, you know." Emma sighed. "Of course I did." "Why?" She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Because you're my brother, Michael. Because I love you. And because I never stopped hoping you'd come back." Michael clenched his jaw, trying to hold back the emotions rising in his chest. He had spent so long believing he was beyond saving, that no one would want him back. But here she was, offering him warmth, offering him a chance. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be normal again." Emma reached out, covering his hand with hers. "You don't have to do it alone." Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Michael picked up the clean clothes and nodded. "I think I'll take that shower now." Emma smiled, her eyes glistening. "Take your time." As Michael stepped into the hallway, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. He wasn't sure if he could rebuild the life he had lost. But for the first time in 5 years, he was willing to try. To be continued. Steam filled the small bathroom as Michael turned the shower handle, watching the warm water cascade down. He hesitated before stepping in, his fingers brushing against the rough fabric of his tattered shirt. He had worn it for so long that it felt like a second skin, one that carried the weight of every hardship he had endured. Taking a deep breath, he peeled it off and let it drop to the floor. Then, for the first time in years, he stepped into a real shower. The water hit his skin, and he sucked in a sharp breath. It was almost too much, too hot, too comforting, too unfamiliar. Dirt and grime washed away in swirling trails down the drain, but the feeling of exhaustion, of lost years, clung to him. He braced himself against the tiled wall, eyes squeezed shut. Could he really do this? Could he really start over? Minutes passed before he finally reached for the soap, lathering his skin with slow, deliberate movements. The simple act of washing felt surreal, as if he were scrubbing away more than just dirt. He was scrubbing away the version of himself that had survived on the streets, the version that had accepted loneliness as his fate. By the time he stepped out, wrapping himself in a towel, he barely recognized his reflection in the foggy mirror. His beard was uneven, his hair unkempt, his face more sunken than he remembered. But beneath it all, he saw something else, something he hadn't seen in a long time. A glimpse of the man he used to be. When he finally emerged from the bathroom, dressed in the clean clothes Emma had given him, he found her waiting in the kitchen. A steaming bowl of soup sat on the table. The smell of chicken broth and herbs filled the air, triggering a memory so vivid it almost hurt. Their mother used to make soup like this. Emma looked up, offering a small smile. Figured you could use a hot meal. Michael sat down slowly, his hands wrapped around the warm bowl. Thank you, he murmured. They ate in silence for a while. The food was simple, but to him it felt like a feast. His body had grown used to hunger, but now, as he tasted something made with care, he realized just how starved he had been. Not just for food, but for comfort. Emma finally broke the silence. Do you want to stay here for a while? No pressure. Just until you figure out what's next. Michael set his spoon down, his fingers tightening around the edge of the bowl. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to accept the warmth, the kindness, the second chance she was offering. But fear gnawed at him. What if he let her down? What if he wasn't strong enough to fix himself? I don't know, he admitted. I don't want to be a burden. Emma reached across the table, gripping his hand. You're not a burden, Michael. You're my family. Her voice was steady, filled with a quiet certainty that made his chest ache. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just let yourself rest. Let yourself heal. Michael swallowed hard, his throat tight. For 5 years, he had been running from his past, from his mistakes, from himself. Maybe it was time to stop. Maybe it was time to let someone in. He exhaled slowly and nodded. Okay. Emma squeezed his hand and smiled. The days that followed blurred together in a strange mix of comfort and unease. Each morning, Michael woke to the sound of birds outside Emma's window, the soft hum of the coffee maker, and the smell of breakfast cooking in the kitchen. It was so different from the cold, distant mornings he had known, where the only sounds were the rustling of the wind and the city coming to life around him. At first, he had struggled with the simple routines. Waking up at a reasonable hour, eating breakfast without guilt, and even having conversations with Emma seemed overwhelming. But little by little, something in him began to change. He had been so accustomed to surviving, to living on autopilot, that he had forgotten how to just live. For the first time in years, Michael didn't feel alone. Every evening, after the sun set, they would sit together on the couch, and Emma would talk about her day, about her work, her daughter, the small things that once seemed insignificant but now felt like the heartbeat of life. Michael listened, absorbing the warmth of normalcy, but he still kept his distance, his mind often drifting to the past. He thought about the shelter, about Sarah, and the lives that continued on without him. He had promised her he would come back, but part of him still wasn't ready to face the part of himself that had spent so long in darkness. One evening, as they were sitting quietly, Emma asked, "Do you want to talk about what happened? About why you disappeared?" Michael stiffened. The question was one he had avoided for days, and the thought of reliving it all caused a knot to form in his stomach. He wasn't ready to go there. Not yet. "I don't know if I can," he said quietly, his voice rough. Emma didn't push. Instead, she gave him a gentle smile, one that told him it was okay to take his time. "Whenever you're ready, I'm here." And just like that, the weight of his past hung less heavy in the air. For the first time, he didn't feel rushed. He didn't feel like he had to fix everything all at once. Days turned into weeks, and Michael began to find a new rhythm. He started helping Emma with small things around the house, washing dishes, folding laundry, even playing with Lily when she came over. It was nothing grand, but to Michael, it was everything. It was proof that he could still contribute, that he wasn't beyond redemption. But deep down, a part of him knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. The real test would come when he faced the world outside of Emma's house. Would he still be the same man who had wandered the streets? Or would he finally be able to rebuild a life that mattered? One afternoon, as Michael was walking through the small park near Emma's house, his phone buzzed. It was Sarah. His fingers hesitated over the screen. He had meant to call her after settling in, to thank her for the kindness she had shown him, but he had kept putting it off, unsure of what to say. Taking a deep breath, he tapped the message open. "Michael, I've been thinking about you. I know you're trying to find your way. If you ever want to come back to the shelter, we're here for you. No pressure. Just know that you're not alone." For a moment, Michael stood frozen, his heart racing. The weight of Sarah's words settled in his chest. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what the shelter represented, the need for change, for action, for accountability. But it wasn't just about the shelter. It was about his next step. Could he really go back to that world? Was he strong enough to leave the safety of Emma's house, the warmth that had come to mean everything, and face the uncertainties of the world again? He didn't know. But one thing was certain. He couldn't stay stuck forever. With a trembling hand, he typed a response. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll think about it." As he pressed send, Michael realized that it wasn't the answer he needed to give right now. The journey ahead would be about more than just one step. It would be about learning to trust again, to heal, and to accept that life would be full of uncertain moments. He had come this far. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to keep moving forward. The days after Michael's message to Sarah passed slowly, each one filled with a quiet tension. He had told Emma about the message, and while she didn't push him, he could see the worry in her eyes. She knew, deep down, that Michael couldn't hide in the warmth of her home forever. The world outside was waiting for him, and he would eventually have to face it. Emma had always been his rock, the one person who believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. But now, she was quietly preparing herself for the day when he would leave, when he would have to take his first steps back into the world. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Emma turned to him with a serious look. "You know you can't stay here forever, right?" Michael swallowed. He had expected this conversation, but hearing it aloud made it more real. He had been living in a bubble, cocooned in Emma's world, pretending that everything could stay the same. "I know," he said softly, his voice uncertain. "But I'm not sure I'm ready." Emma nodded, her expression softening. "It's okay if you're not ready. But you can't wait forever either. Whatever you decide, you have to choose for yourself, Michael. Not for me. Not for anyone else." Michael stared out at the quiet street, the trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. What did it even mean to choose? He had been choosing survival for so long that he didn't remember what it felt like to choose anything else. But the thought of going back to the shelter, of facing his past, of confronting all the pieces of himself he had buried, was overwhelming. But as he sat there, something began to stir inside him. For the first time in years, he realized he had choices. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about living. The next morning, after a restless night of tossing and turning, Michael stood in front of the bathroom mirror, his eyes lingering on the reflection that seemed foreign to him. The man looking back wasn't the same person who had stumbled into Emma's house weeks ago. There was still pain in his eyes, but there was also something else, determination. He knew he couldn't hide forever. He had to step back into the world, even if it scared him. He reached for his phone. Sarah's message was still there, waiting. With a deep breath, Michael typed a reply. I'm ready to come back. I'll be there tomorrow. As he hit send, a wave of uncertainty washed over him. He wasn't sure what would happen when he arrived at the shelter, or what kind of man he was when he stepped through those doors again. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope, the belief that maybe, just maybe, he could start again. Later that day, as he packed a small bag with a few belongings he had managed to hold onto, his worn jacket, a pair of shoes that had seen better days, and a crumpled photograph of him and Emma as children, he turned to Emma. I'm going back to the shelter, he said quietly. She nodded, her face unreadable for a moment. Then, she stood up and pulled him into a hug, holding him tight. I'm proud of you, Michael. And whatever happens, you're not alone. The hug lingered for a moment longer, and Michael closed his eyes, taking in the warmth of her embrace. It wasn't just the comfort of her arms around him, it was the love and trust she had shown him, even when he hadn't been able to offer anything in return. I'll be okay, he whispered, even though part of him wasn't sure if that was true. But he had to believe it. As he stepped out of the house and into the world, the uncertainty still hung heavy in the air. But Michael knew that this was his next step, his choice. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could take it. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to begin again. Michael's footsteps were steady, but unsure as he walked down the familiar street toward the shelter. Each step seemed to take him further from the comfort of Emma's house and closer to a life he hadn't been part of for years. The city was alive around him. Cars honking, people chatting, children playing, but it felt like he was moving through a world that had left him behind. He had spent so long running, so long hiding from the pain of his past, that now every corner, every street sign, felt like a reminder of everything he had lost. The streets, once so familiar, now felt alien to him. But as he neared the shelter, something shifted. The old building stood in front of him like a monument to his past, a place that had once felt like a refuge, but now felt like a weight he wasn't sure he could carry again. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the door. The fear that had been growing inside him for days bubbled up, fear of facing the people he had left behind, fear of the mistakes he had made, and fear of the man he had become. But then, through the door, he saw Sarah. She was standing in the small office, talking to someone, her smile soft and genuine. And for the first time in years, Michael felt a flicker of hope. She was still here, still offering him a chance. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, and Sarah looked up. Her eyes softened when she saw him, and she walked over, her steps quick and purposeful. Michael, she said, her voice filled with quiet warmth. You came. He nodded, swallowing hard. I'm ready to try again. Sarah gave him a small but knowing smile. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Michael looked around at the familiar space, the worn couches, the bulletin board with flyers, the scent of old coffee and disinfectant in the air. It felt like a lifetime ago that he had stayed here, that he had lived among the people who had once been his family, when he had nothing left. But now, as he stood in the doorway, he wasn't the same man who had walked in all those years ago. He wasn't the man who had given up. I don't know if I'm strong enough, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm and steady. You don't have to be strong enough. You just have to keep going. You've already made the hardest decision, coming back. For a moment, Michael let the silence settle between them. He had spent so much of his life running, hiding from the things that scared him. But right now, in this moment, he knew he didn't have to do it alone anymore. I'm not sure I can ever forgive myself for the things I've done, he said quietly. Sarah shook her head gently. You don't need to be perfect, Michael. You just need to keep moving forward, one day at a time. And for the first time in a long time, Michael felt the smallest weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't sure what would happen next, or what the future held. But he knew that this was the right step. That coming back, facing his past, and taking it one day at a time was the only way to start rebuilding. As he followed Sarah into the shelter, a strange feeling washed over him. Uncertainty, fear, but also a quiet strength. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew he was no longer alone. The journey was just beginning. Days turned into weeks, and Michael slowly began to find his place again at the shelter. At first, the old familiar routine felt daunting. The meals in the communal dining hall, the group sessions where everyone shared their struggles, the simple acts of kindness from strangers who were all fighting their own battles. But with each passing day, something inside him began to heal. He started helping with small tasks around the shelter, cleaning, organizing, even cooking some meals. It wasn't much, but it felt like a start. And each small step, each simple act of contributing, built the foundation for something Michael hadn't realized he was missing: purpose. Sarah checked in on him often, encouraging him without pushing him. There was no pressure to be fixed overnight, no rush to forget his past. He was allowed to be as broken as he felt and to grow at his own pace. One afternoon, as Michael sat outside with a cup of coffee, a young man he recognized from the shelter came to sit beside him. His name was Tony, and they'd shared some quiet moments together before. "How you holding up, man?" Tony asked. Michael gave him a half smile. "I'm making it." Tony nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. "That's all we can do, right? Just keep making it one day at a time." For the first time in a long while, Michael believed him. He wasn't going to fix everything in one grand gesture. He wasn't going to magically become the person he once was. But he could keep going. He could choose every day to move forward. As the months passed, Michael began to rebuild the relationships that had been lost, slowly, gently, and with the same care he used to take when putting pieces of his broken heart back together. Emma came to visit often, bringing Lily with her. They would sit together in the small garden outside the shelter, talking about life, about the future, and about how far Michael had come. And then one day, as Michael was sweeping the shelter's front steps, Sarah approached him, a small, knowing smile on her face. "We've been talking, and there's a job opening here. It's not much, just part-time helping with maintenance and some admin stuff. But I thought you might be interested." Michael paused, leaning on the broom, looking up at her. He hadn't expected anything like this. A job, a real job. Something he could call his own. Yeah, I'd like that," he said, his voice steady but filled with surprise. The offer felt like an opportunity to put down roots, to give something back. "Good," Sarah said with a nod. "You've come a long way, Michael. I'm proud of you." The words wrapped around him like a warm blanket, a promise that, even though the past would always be there, he had finally found a way forward. The journey wasn't over. It would never be, but it was his now. His to navigate, his to shape. And in that moment, Michael realized that he had finally come home. Not to the shelter, not to Emma's house, but to himself. He was no longer running. He was ready to live. With a deep breath, he looked up at the sky, feeling the sun on his face, and took his first real step into the future. The end.